Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Janine Antoni. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on her, and then I'm going to try to save as much time so she can tell you all the good stuff about her career. Mrs. Antoni was born in Freeport, Bahamas. She received her BA from Sarah Lawrence College and her MFA from RISD. She's known for her unusual processes, using her body as both a tool and a source of meaning within the conceptual framework of her practice. Antoni's early methods involved transforming unique materials such as chocolate and soap through habitual everyday processes like bathing, eating, and sleeping to create sculptural works and installations. By way of her body of work, Antoni carefully articulates her relationship to the world, giving rise to emotional states that are felt in and through the senses. In each piece, no matter the medium or image, a conveyed physicality is meant to speak directly to the viewer's body. Antoni's extensive resume consists of accomplishments that most of us will only dream of. She has exhibited at numerous major institutions, including the Whitney, MoMA, SF MoMA, the Mattress Factory, the Hirshhorn Museum, the Reina Sofia in Madrid, the Irish Museum of Modern Art, Magazine 3 Handelshögskolan in Sweden, the Hayward Gallery in London, and the Sammlung Goetz in Munich. She's also been represented in several international biennials, such as the Whitney, Venice, Johannesburg, Gwangju, Istanbul, Site Santa Fe, Project One, and Kachi Muziris. She's had work included in Documentary 14 in Kassel, Germany. And most recently, Mrs. Antoni was the subject of a solo show at the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, where she was commissioned to present a new body of work entitled I Am Fertile Ground in the Cemetery's Catacombs. Antoni is the recipient of several prestigious awards, including a MacArthur, a Guggenheim, and a Creative Capital Artist Grant, among many others. Her work is included in numerous collections in the U.S. and abroad, including but not limited to the National Gallery of Art in D.C., MoMA, the Whitney, the Guggenheim, SF MoMA, MoCA right here in Los Angeles, and the Brooklyn Museum. Antoni currently resides in New York. She has a daughter who attends Pitzer College, who is here today. And we are very thankful, of course, for her willingness to come and share a bit about her life and her practice with all of us today. So without further ado, it is my honor and pleasure to present to you all Janine Antoni.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to Scripps for having me. It's always an honor to have the opportunity to talk to you about some of the things that are most meaningful to me. I'm going to start right in with my first piece that I did out of graduate school. What you're looking at here are negative imprints in the wall. The first is my breast, the second, my nipple. Then you have 3 latex nipples, baby bottle tops, and the last form is the packaging that those come in. You know, when you go to the drugstore, there's that kind of plastic vacuum form packaging with the cardboard backing. Those 3 nipples stack and fit into there. The reason I'm showing you a piece from so far back is this piece was a breakthrough for me in terms of, I could almost say that my work is still in this territory. And the really important moment for me is the moment between the real nipple and the latex nipple. All the objects I work with are something like the latex nipple. They mediate our intimate interaction with our body. They replace the body, and they somehow define the body within the culture. So the piece is called Wean, and I was thinking of stages of separation from the mother and trying to figure out how can I talk about absence with a sculpture that's present in the space. That's why I took the existing architecture and removed these forms. But more importantly than separation from the mother, what I'm interested in is the separation that we experience with our own bodies as we're weaned into the culture. So this is my brother and I, and we are pouring 500 pounds of chocolate. We had to do a pour every 4 hours so that the the cooling process could be even, so I would wake him up and we'd do another pour all through the night. And there you have it as a cube, and believe it or not, I chewed on that for about a month and a half. I took the same mold and I cast lard and chewed on that as well. So I was very excited about my white, pristine cube, and I went out to celebrate, and I came home, and the entire thing collapsed onto the ground. And the show's coming up, and I have to make some quick decisions. Should I put a freezing unit into it? Should I put wax? And I decided if that's what 500 pounds of lard does, that's what I should let happen. And it seemed very conceptually in keeping with what I was thinking about with the work, because, of course, we all know how hard it is to control fat in our own bodies. So the material that I spit out from these two forms, I took the lard, I mixed it with pigment and beeswax and made 150 lipstick. And the chocolate that I spit out, I melted down and I made this chocolate packaging for chocolate candies. And then I put them all in a display that looks something like, you know, the cosmetic display at Bloomingdale's. This is, I kind of think of this as my art school exorcism. I sort of put everything I learned in art school into one work. I'm not sure I advise that, but I got a lot of things out of my system. I started with, you know, actually wanting to do the most traditional thing I could do as a sculptor, and that was to carve. But I was also interested in another tradition, the tradition of figurative sculpture. But instead of describing the body, what I wanted to do was talk about the body by the residue it left on the object. And so I decided rather than use a hammer and chisel, I would use my mouth. And if I'm going to sculpt with my mouth, I don't know about you, but chocolate seemed like the natural choice. Then we know what happens when we succumb to our desire in the chocolate. We get fat, and then I would turn around and use the fat to make lipstick so that we can make ourselves beautiful so someone can give us a heart-shaped box of chocolate. So I'm enjoying my little story that I'm telling myself. But there's a few quotes that you can see in the piece. So I was thinking about the minimalist cube, and the critique at the time was that this was an angry critique of patriarchal art history. I thought it was pretty hilarious for me to be chewing on the minimalist cube, but they didn't quite get it. But I was also studying in a generation when we were really concerned with consumer critique. So that's where I came up with the idea of these, not handmade ready-mades, but these ready-mades that had somehow gone through my body and out into the world. But really what was important to me was the performance work done in the 70s, specifically by female artists. So, using similar strategies, I came up with this idea, if Gnaw, sorry I didn't tell you that piece was called Gnaw. This piece is called Loving Care, and if Gnaw was about sculpture, this was my attempt to think about painting. And I thought if my mouth could be a good hammer and chisel, my hair could be a pretty good paintbrush. And so I used Loving Care hair dye, and I did this as a performance, and slowly, as I mopped the floor, I mopped the people out of the room. I was thinking about my mom. When I was little, she'd say, "Janine, go outside and play. I've just mopped the kitchen floor." And so I wanted to mop the space of the gallery or the museum, sort of claiming the space for myself. But of course, instead of cleaning it, I'm making it dirty. So there are some inspirations and critiques in this work. Of course, well, I think you know these famous photos of Pollock doing his dance around the canvas. I certainly was thinking about that in the documentation of this work. But more importantly, I was thinking of Yves Klein. And do you know these paintings where Yves Klein put blue paint on a woman and she rolled on the canvas? What he said about that work is, rather than to paint the model, I want to paint with the model. And my response is that Loving Care is really the desire to be the model and the master at the same time, and the inherent contradictions of that. So this is my drawing equivalent to Loving Care. It's called Butterfly Kisses. It's done with my eyelashes. The medium is CoverGirl Thick Lash Mascara, and there's 1,124 winks on each page done with either eye. They take me a while because I can do about 60 winks a day. That's my cutoff point in masochism. So they take me quite a while to make. And I gave it that number because I wanted you to feel, what it would be like to wink your eye that many times. And you can see with these last pieces I've shown you, I've been interested in aesthetics that have been passed down to us through art history, but also aesthetics as they're defined by the culture in terms of woman and beauty. And my hope is that if I work with both of them in a parallel way, I can call them both into question. Close up. So this is not a performance. It's the process I went through to make a piece. So what's happening here is I'm hanging above a tub that's filled to the top with lard. And I get myself lowered into the lard, and I think I'm just going to magically sink into the lard, but it didn't happen. So I had to call my friends to bury me. So here's the process of being buried. And then here I am under the tub. Can you see right in front of the rope? There's like a clear tube. I'm breathing out of that tube. And the reason I did that is I wanted to remove my body capacity and fat. So we flattened out the top of the tub, and we had this bucket of fat, which is the same capacity as my body. Then I get pulled out rather dramatically. And then what you have is a pretty detailed image of the negative impression of my body in the tub. And then I took that bucket of fat, I mixed it with lye and water, and I made this huge bar of soap. And then for about 2 weeks, I bathed with the soap, so slowly sculpting it down by repeated washing, a little bit like gnaw with the bites. The piece is called Eureka. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Archimedes. He was asked by the king how much gold was in his crown, and he was killing himself, how can he measure capacity? And he's in the bathtub, and he realizes that his body's displacing the water in the tub. He jumps out, screams Eureka, and runs through the streets naked. I love this story for a couple of reasons. One, Archimedes' body was the tool for the experiment, but also the idea that he came to this knowledge through the experience of his body. And that's why I do these extreme acts, because I know that you have a body, and you probably don't have such a neutral relationship to chewing on 500 pounds of chocolate and being dumped in a tub of lard. So I'm interested in whether I can put you in a position of empathy with my process, and then you can have your own reaction to that. So this is my big breakthrough after Wien. If Wien told you a story that began with the body and sort of this sentence that makes its way into the culture, now I've told you a story that begins and ends with the body. So I get very excited about that idea. So I cast myself 7 times in chocolate and 7 times in soap. And I reshaped my image by licking the chocolate and washing the soap. I asked myself, why traditionally have we been making self-portraits forever? And I had a few answers for myself. One is to immortalize oneself, but of course I'm working with chocolate and soap, so I'm kind of working against the grain of that. And the other is to make a public image, an image that presents yourself to the world. But are we really more ourselves at home, in the bathtub, or eating a meal? And wouldn't it be interesting to describe the self through those processes? So it was an interesting process of doing the piece because it's very intimate and almost loving, like having this soap head in the bathtub is almost like having a little baby in there. But through that process, I'm erasing myself. So for me, the piece is really about this kind of love-hate relationship we have with our physical appearance. So I made a piece about eating and bathing, and I was like, I want to make a work in my sleep. I was like, couldn't really figure out what the material of sleep is. I was not so satisfied with the bed. And I decided that dreams were the material of sleep, but dreams are immaterial, so that created a problem for me. I went to surrealism, I went to psychoanalysis, and finally I found this book on the physiological approach to sleep. And in that book, I found this machine you see on the left. It's called a polysomnograph. It's kind of like an EKG machine, but it records your rapid eye movement. So what happened is I slept in the bed. I hooked myself up to the polysomnograph. I recorded one night of my rapid eye movement, about 1,500 pages. And I worked with a neurophysiologist to go through all of those lines and be able to distinguish which sections were my dreams, my REM. I isolated those sections, and I used them as a pattern to weave a very long blanket. So when I would wake up in the morning, I would take like shreds from my nightgown, and I would use it as the material to draw my REM into the blanket. It was very interesting to be in the work talking to the viewers as they were seeing it, and it was so interesting to see how different cultures responded to the piece, and also how people individually talked about the piece, how they talked about their fear of sleeping alone. They were telling me the dreams they had that night. When I did it last in the United States, someone walked in and said, "Wow, you have a dream catcher above your bed too." And I'd never thought of all these warp threads as a dream catcher. So that was really interesting to get so close to my viewer as I was making the work. So this is my mom and dad. And this is my mom and dad. And this is my mom and dad. So I thought it would be a really cool idea to try to turn my mom into my dad and my dad into my mom. They weren't so sure about it. So I can say that my parents are the best material I've ever worked with. A lot of my work has to do with identity, specifically gender identity, and of course they are my examples of how I came to understand my own sexual identity. And so I got a makeup artist to teach me to do the makeup on them. Of course, he could have done a much better job, but I felt like they had made me, and now I would like to turn around and remake them. So it took me about 1.5 years to get the photographs that made me happy. The better I got at the craft of doing the makeup, the more self-conscious they got. So it was an interesting process of making them feel okay about the whole thing. I really, they are so supportive, my parents, but they don't really know much about art. And I thought if I put them in the work that they would understand what my work was about, but in fact, you know, it was very psychologically loaded for me to have them, you know, look at each other and see themselves in the other. And it was really interesting. My dad he knew that my work was feminist, and he was worried that I was making fun of him. But then when he put on the dress and the wig, he really enjoyed himself. And then my mom, it was like that I was making her old and ugly, and that she was a generation that was very, her security was in her beauty, as you can see, and so that was also an interesting play. Anyway, we came full circle, and they had the piece hanging in their living room. So here I am with my mom, dressed as my dad, turning my dad into my mom. So this is my friend Nary Ward, and he's helping me put these 2 limestone boulders on top of each other. I was in Greece, in Delphi, and I saw these walls, and the stones were honeycomb-shaped, and the stones were fitting perfectly together. And I turned to my friend, I said, "How is that possible?" It had no mortar between, and she said, "Oh, they took the 2 stones and rubbed them till they were airtight." And I just thought that was so beautiful. I wanted to make my version of that, almost like Brancusi's Kiss or something. So I got these 2 limestone boulders, took them to Maine, put them on top of each other, started walking around, trying to grind the top stone into the bottom stone. But I don't really know much about stone, so I shouldn't have chosen limestone, because limestone has harder and softer parts. So if you see on the left, you can see this hard ball that was like carving an upside down bowl in the top rock, and then this part was very soft. And what was happening is the more I was walking around, the more articulate and even in distance was being produced between the two, instead of this perfect marrying that I was trying to accomplish. And then I started to think about, is this a more interesting way to think about a relationship, that we carve the space between each other? So I named the piece A-N-D, to name that space in between. Here it is in the gallery. So this piece is called Mortar and Pestle. It's, in those days, a pretty big photograph, 4 feet by 4 feet. Now that doesn't seem as big. But it's shot on an 8 by 10 camera. I like to say it's a little closer than intimate. My tongue and my ex-husband's eye. And I like to say that this was inspired by wanting to know the taste of his vision. I don't know if you've had this experience when you look into the eyes of someone you love and you wonder what they're seeing when they look back at you. And so, of course, I know that vision doesn't have a taste, but this is as close as I could get to trying to understand something in a very illogical way. What I want to say is, for me, if you think back to Mom and Dad, and you think about the 2 stones, and you think about this piece, to me, they're all the same work, even though their form is radically different. So it's all about 2 forms trying to come together, and then the meaning happening in their resistance, even in spite of me. So I have a thing for cows. I grew up in an island where we only had 1 cow on the whole island, and we would drive 30 minutes to see this cow like it was a monument or something. And I got to show in Sweden at a working dairy farm. I was very excited. I was like, can I go see the cows? And I went in to see the cows, and having not grown up around farms, I didn't know that they use bathtubs as troughs. So the first thought I had was, why is this cow drinking out of this form that's made for my body? And then what will happen if I take a bath? So I got in the tub, and I have to tell you, cows are very curious animals. And the whole herd came over, and I'm trying to look very calm and relaxed there, and I'm freaking out because they're kind of klutzy and this big head. The piece is called 2038, and that's the number in the cow's ear. You know, having not grown up around cows, what I was really interested in is, like, we're weaned off of the mother onto the cow, but a very intimate relationship. She's kind of like a wet nurse or surrogate mother, but we never know her. So I wanted to put myself in intimate relationship with her. I took about 100 photos, and this was the very last one. And she made the piece. She came and drank as if she was drinking from my breast. So that brought everything full circle. So I love the name 2038 because it just epitomizes our relationship to the cow. It's like a biological machine. It's hardly like an animal to us. So when I got married, it was right before the wedding, and my mom's in the car with me, and she says, Janine, I would like to give you the family silverware, but I know you'll never clean it. And I thought, is this a compliment or a criticism? So I took the family silverware, Reed and Barton Rose Cascade is the name of it, with the monogram A at the end. And I cast the negative impression of my mouth at the bowl and the negative impression of my mother's hand on the handle. And so it's solid silver. It's called umbilical. So I was interested in the fact that, I had fed from her body, maybe from this very spoon, and now she wanted to turn around and give me this object for feeding others, an object that's loaded with notions of domesticity and class. So I gave myself this assignment where I wanted to make an object that was holding itself. So I have a thing for tractors, and I got this huge backhoe, cut it in half, and then I melted down the material and cast it into these objects that you see inside. So the first one is an agricultural bucket, then an excavator, then a snow shovel, then a garden shovel, a fireplace shovel, a serving spoon, a soup spoon, and then a baby spoon. So that last spoon is a loop spoon, and it's the first spoon that you give a baby when it's learning to feed itself. So I wanted to just follow this trajectory from the landscape all the way to the body. And I was thinking about how, using this loop spoon is like this moment of independence and sort of the goal of separation and to take care of yourself, but how we never lose the need to be held. It's called cradle. So again, in my mind, the same work. And this is an image of me holding my leg as if it were a baby. It's called coddle. And I was thinking, about paintings of the mother and child or the Virgin Mary and child. But in time, I've started to think about it more like the Pietà, because it's sort of like about what is missing in the image. And I've read the beginning of this book by Jeanette Winterson says, "Why is the measure of love lost?" And that's been very meaningful for me in terms of this work. So here's Mom. I was trying to make a photograph that looked like a 17th century painting, a Vermeer or something, woman in a domestic setting, something very familiar. And then maybe it would take you a while to realize there's 3 feet coming out from under the dress rather than 2, and you realize I'm still having problems separating from my mom. So back to the cow obsession. I got a skin sent to me straight off the cow, only with the hair removed, sort of like a piece of wet meat. And I cast myself in 5 parts on my hands and knees, and I threw the hide over. And then I had 24 hours to sculpt the hide. It sculpted almost like clay, but it shrank during that time. And then in the morning, I could turn the whole thing over and unscrew the mold and pull it out. The piece is called Saddle, and it's a kind of a haunting work for me. Every time I try to install it, it looks like it's crawling around the room. And when you look at the piece, it's both a ghost of the cow and a ghost of myself. So I grew up in the Bahamas. This is a piece I did, it's a video work that I did on the beach right in front of my home. I learned to tightrope to make the piece. I got 2 backhoes and brought them out on the beach and stretched this wire between them. And I walked back and forth. I dug a hole for my assistant so that when she filmed it, the weight of my body would just rest right on the edge of the horizon. I'm kind of interested in what the horizon represents for us. This is probably the image I looked at most in my life. I could see the sea from my bed. And My mom used to say this thing. She used to say, Janine, go out and see the world because we come from this place that's behind God's back. She means this like little forgotten island. And so I would look out at the horizon and think about the world out there. But the horizon is a funny thing because the closer you get to it, the more it recedes. So I decided that it was really the place of my imagination, and I wanted to try to balance in that place. The piece is called Touch. So a friend of mine called me up and she said, I found this thing online that I think you'll be very interested in. I don't know if you know about them. This is called a travel mate. There's also, it's an object for women to be able to pee standing up. There's also the she-wee and the whiz-biz. And of course I was very interested in it because in the Bahamas I grew up, we're really, had a lot of pirates in the Bahamas. And I remember my brother reading this book and he told me about this woman, Anne Bonnet, and she was a female pirate that disguised herself as a man by using an apparatus to pee standing up. I thought that was really cool. So I decided I want to make a piece with this. And when I was in school, I went to school with nuns, and they used to tell me that my body was a vessel. And that meant that it was sacred, but I didn't really understand. I thought that I was architecture. So I sort of got this idea of combining the gargoyle with architecture, and that I could pee off of a very tall building. So I wanted to pee off of a cathedral, but for some reason, I don't know, nobody wanted to let me pee off of a cathedral, and I'm getting very nervous. My show's coming up, and finally, I got access to the Chrysler. And the crazy thing is that I chose to turn the travel mate into a gargoyle that is half lion, half bird. I figured that that was a kind of hybrid, and with me using this object, I would be a kind of hybrid. I made it in copper. I don't know if you know this, but urine is a very good, creates a very good patina, but also, you know, a lot of architecture has copper at the top, and also our pipes in the bathroom are copper. And then it was so great that the Chrysler also had this griffin. So I'm all ready for the act. And just as I go to pee, the wind blows, and it does this crazy thing with my hair, and I feel like I got to be both the lion and the pirate. So that's how I show it in the gallery. It's called Conduit. So this is a piece that I made when I had first, I had given birth to my daughter, and I was very concerned with how to be a good mother, and I was reading Winnicott, who is a psychologist who talks a lot about, he studied mothers with their children, and he brought up this term, the good enough mother, and that's a mother that's not hovering over the child, but allows the child to unfold in the way that they want to, but is always present, so the child always has the comfort of that presence. So I'm a closet ecstatic dancer, maybe not so closet these days, and I was dancing, and I was always attracted to this older woman, and we would dance together, and this time when we were dancing, she was dancing to the slow beat in the music, and I was dancing to the fast beat, and I got this image of a spider making a web between the branches of a tree. And I start to think about the mother as this supportive structure where the child is making this delicate web. So I thought, I'm going to make a piece where a spider makes a web between my legs. That wasn't so smart. It's really hard to get a spider to make a web between your legs. So I started talking to all these spider experts, you know, a guy at Gainesville, Harvard. They're like, you know, you have to stay still all night. And I'm like, I'm a performance artist. And there's like, no, really still. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get some kind of harness so I can stay in it all night, and then I'll take the harness off and take the photo. And so I started calling these harness companies, and I don't really want to say what I'm doing, so I'm just like asking questions, and finally he's like, lady, I've heard it all. So I told him what I wanted to do, and he shows me this harness. And this harness is attached many places in the body. It's used for a movie when there's an explosion and the body has to go back like that. So I looked at this thing and I was like, that's a spider web. And then I had to figure out, how am I going to get the spider to stay between my legs? I'm going to have to create some box and take the box off. And then I was like, if I have a web between a web, I could have a house within a house. So then what I did is I found 4 spiders. I put one in every room of the house. I left them overnight. Oh, I retrofitted the doll's house to the shape of my body. And I woke up in the morning. 3 spiders took their webs down immediately, and the one in the kitchen hadn't finished her job. So I went and had a croissant, and I came back, and she had done the last part of the web, and she was the best assistant ever. Every time I put the house on, she would go back and pose at the center. This piece is 150 photographs stitched together because I wanted the detail of the spider, so it's pretty focused across the whole surface. Nobody notices the spider. But I couldn't have made the piece without running after the spider. But anyway, here she is. And I love that she chose, the one that chose to be there chose the kitchen. This piece is called Host. And I found this particular spider in a web between my daughter's swing, the ropes of her swing. So I seem to think it's her. So when I was getting ready to give birth, I was told that if there was going to be a successful vaginal birth, that the baby had to turn around and engage its head in the hip bones. It's called crowning. And I just thought that was so magnificent, that the child is crowned by the mother right before it enters the world. So I tried to make a peace with this for many years, and they're all pretty bad. But I settled on this piece. So what happened is I got a ceramic vessel that was made on the wheel, and then I got a company that could tell me that the plastic hip bones that I bought from them were from childbearing women. I cast those, and I used that as a shape to shape the vessel. So while the vessel was turning, I used that inner edge of the hip bone to shape it. So I think of the piece as a kind of womb. This has 3 hip bones. That's because I was imitating a ding, which is a Chinese vessel, which is used for cooking on the fire. So the womb is a kind of, oven of sorts. And then I did it in raku, which is, this kind of ancient-looking surface is because the entire thing was put in a pit of fire. And this is an amphora where the neck is shaped by the hip bones. And then I thought of taking the hip bone and put it out towards the architecture. So I had this revelation of crown molding, which is the molding that's up at the top of the ceiling. So I got these master plasterers. They do this thing called running in place. Like now, these days, we just cast that shape and plonk it on the wall, but in those days, you took wet plaster and you pulled a shape along it, and it created whatever shape you wanted. So I got these guys, gave them the hip bones, and we made it. And I told them that they couldn't, the one thing you should never do when you're doing this is leave drips, but I left all the drips. So it could be very visceral. This is chair molding, and it goes all the way around the gallery, and then I just left the hip bones in there. So I have this love of milagros. These are objects that are prayers for healing, and you find them in many countries in the world. Portugal, Brazil. This is in Bahia, Spain, and Greece. And you would go to a store and buy one of these objects. Like say you have a bad leg, and you'd go and buy this wax leg, and you'd take it to the church and hang it up as a prayer for healing. So you can imagine walking into a church with just the entire ceiling of body parts. You might be more familiar with these ones. Maybe they're more Mexican, I'm not sure. These little medallions, which are the same. And so I love the idea of making a work that is a prayer. And this is one, I made several works inspired by these milagros, but this one was a piece about crossing my legs. When I was young, I had this aunt, not a real aunt, but in the Caribbean we call everyone aunt. She's British, and she'd come over every Tuesday for tea, and she would tell me, I'm going to teach you how to drink tea like a lady. And so, of course, I had to curl my pinky. But more importantly, I had to cross my legs. And I was like, why is that ladylike? It seems that we like to narrow the base of women, whether we put them in high heels or we put them in toe shoes. There's something about women should float and be ethereal. But, I've spent the last 20 years trying to live an embodied life, and I do a lot of somatic practices, and we know the strongest structure is a triangle, and being grounded is everything. So I took my cross legs and I attached them to this stump of a tree. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, but Greek and Roman statues, first of all, standing up is a miracle. Let's just establish that all your muscles are working in tandem to keep you upright. But if I were to sculpt you and stood you up, you would fall right over. So the Romans weren't as good as the Greeks. They needed more of these things called struts. So they would add this branch of a tree behind them to make the base wider. So I tethered my cross legs to that. And the piece is called To Compose. And then I thought, I'm going to cross my future leg with my present leg. That's where the bony leg came in. So I was thinking about what was the biggest hug I could give someone. And I thought, what if I could just get all this out of the way and my rib bones could just open up and clasp into the other person. So I was very excited about this. Closeness. It bothers a lot of people, the image of it. And then I'm walking around the world with this shape, and I'm like, where should it go? And then I realized it was a basket. So I added the handle, and thinking about how we come together to make a space for something else. So I'm really into that little space at the center where the two hearts would meet. So this is one of the loves of my life. Her name is Anna Halperin. She's a choreographer, and she died a couple years ago at 100. I got to meet her at 96. I can give you some homework tonight when you go home. Get on YouTube and Google The Breath Made Visible. So I saw this documentary about Anna Halperin, and I freaked out, and I realized she was still alive and teaching at Esalen. So I went to Esalen and did a workshop with her, but I was way too shy to introduce myself. And then about a year later, I wrote to her telling her how much her practice had affected my work. And she said, oh, Janine, I know Love and Care. If you're ever in San Francisco, come and have lunch. So I immediately flew to San Francisco to have lunch with Anna Halperin. Another year later, I wrote her a letter saying, I have this idea that I want to do a retrospective of my work in dance. And she called back right away and she said, Janine, I would love to work with you. Completely ignored my proposal and said, I have the perfect piece for you. I would like you to do this section from this work of mine, Parades and Changes. My jaw dropped because that's one of her seminal works. She says, don't worry, you don't have to dance because it's all about sculpture. You just have to do what you do. You just have to show what you do in the studio. And that's all. So I go to San Francisco. She gives me a roll of the most common brown paper that you wrap a package in, and she says, you may want to take your clothes off. Of course, I knew the piece is very controversial because of the nudity and that I couldn't accept the piece without accepting to be nude. And if Anna Halpern tells you to take your clothes off, you take your clothes off. So I started to work with the paper, and this was going on for hours and hours. And finally she says, Janine, you must be getting cold. And then we go up to her house, and she says, I'm going to call the Berkeley Museum, and we should go over there and perform paper dance there. And I said, wait, can you do that? And she says, what are museums for? So I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I was like, this is important. Called up an ex-student of mine. I said, can you come and photograph this? So I performed in the lobby. We didn't invite anybody. It was just me and Anna Halpern and my student, and they said to me, they took photographs. They said at the end, you know what's weird is I saw every piece you've ever made in the paper. I mean, I'm not a improviser, but of course, if I'm trying to improvise, all I could draw on is my past work. So I thought he was just being smart, and then I looked at the photos. I don't know, you tell me what you think. So the interesting thing is I'd sort of come full circle back to the retrospective idea. So what I decided to do was bring 35 years of my work into the gallery. I made a theater in the round by laying a dance floor and bringing all these crates, and the crates were used as seating for the audience. And then every time I performed the piece, I unpacked a work or two and used that work to influence my movement practice. This is Anna doing the piece in 1965 when I was 1 year old. So I was very fascinated by the idea that she could remake her work on another body so many years later. And could I do that to my old work? You know, because we think of art as really being, we want it to be frozen in time. So there's Anna at the center. Here's the paper. So as people were walking into the space, I am opening the crates. And then I get a roll of paper and I start to perform with it. And everything is game. My clothes, the audience, their objects, a lot of looking back at the audience. I'm looking through the big tube there. And just using the paper as a kind of choreographic tool to let it create my movement. Of course, I had to give birth to the paper. Things like this happened that I didn't even realize. And then I just threw away the old paper, and it started to pile up there, and then I went back and turned on the piece of Anna Halpern's and then left the space. It's called Paper Dance. And there she is. So this is another mentor of mine. Her name is Gabrielle Roth. And my next body of work that we were talking about at Greenwood is really inspired by doing this practice called the 5 Rhythms for, 20 years or so. And I got to put my work in the catacombs, which is very exciting, being that I'm into bones. So I decided to, how do I explain this? So when I am dropped into my body and doing this practice, I have moments where my body makes shapes that I don't understand. And when that happens, I try to repeat those shapes to understand if my body has a message for me. I believe that memories are lodged in the body, and when you move your body, those memories rise to the surface. I also feel like my art is also somehow in there, and I just have to, as I do this dance, sometimes I find I get pieces fully formed, sort of like inhabit the piece with the doll's house. So I decided that I wanted to somehow isolate these gestures that came to me in the dance that I didn't quite understand, and I wanted to use a traditional icon as a way to crystallize these gestures. And I read somewhere that they believed when you prayed to the icon that it wasn't about praying to the image depicted, but that the deity was looking at you back at you through the image. And I just thought that as an idea was so beautiful. So I made these gestures. This is your traditional triptych that is like an altarpiece, and because I'm in the cemetery, I wanted to make the deity the earth. That's the most important image at the center, and the feet as these kind of angels on either side. And there it is in the catacomb. And this is a performer performing the gesture across, in the vault across from the piece. And I made these phrases that somehow encapsulated the meaning of each work. And they repeated the phrases and did the gesture. So this is a good example of a gesture that came to me in the dance. It was so strange, I had to grab onto it. And the gesture goes like this. You want to try that? So I don't know about you, but I feel like it's sort of back to the mortar and pestle, but also this spiraling thing. And the phrase I gave it is, I am tool and substance. I apply force, I rotate. I give way and transform. Offering self. So for me, that encapsulates my whole creative process, that my body is both my tool and the substance of which I work. I'm always fascinated by the destructive part of the process. I apply force, I rotate, something about that spiral process of creation. I don't think it's a straight line, but we kind of spiral back on ourselves. And then this idea of the surrender. You know, I have an idea and I want to make the material take the form of that idea, and then of course the material has a different idea, and it's imposing its will on me. And then if I have enough confidence to be in conversation with the material, the piece makes itself. But not only does it make itself, it starts to remake me, and that's kind of the moment that I wait for. So, I forgot to tell you, these crazy frames are made from the bones depicted in the image. So on the left side, you have the negative impression of 4 hands, all the bones in 4 hands, and on the right side, the positive impression. So this piece is called I Open the Gates. And I was really thinking about, could I open my ribs to expose my heart, show you my heart? And this is one vertebrae that slid around clay and left in the shape, and then gold leafed, and that's it in the catacombs. And this friend of mine had 2 open heart surgeries, and she was like, I think I have to perform this piece. And she told me that it was actually the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I didn't realize. So this piece is called I Speak Up, and that's not my hand on my throat, that's actually my daughter's hand. And It's a piece really about speaking your truth. My mom was a real peacekeeper, and she would do anything to create peace in the family. And I try, with all my feminist ideas to speak up, but my daughter's much better at it. So I asked her if she'd come over and put her hand on my throat, give me a little of her powers. So yeah, the whole frame is made by the bones here, impressed into the clay, extruded through the hole. That's what those kind of snaily things are. In my softness, I touch my purpose. In my throat, my words sharpen. I look to the light. I wait to be heard. You can speak your truth, but you can't be heard until people are ready to hear it. This is my mom and dad. And at the end of their life, they were always embraced. And so I took this picture of them in bed, and I just put some gold on my dad's ear. He slept through the whole thing. And put some gold on my mom's hand, and she's like touching him all over, and then she just grabbed his ear, and I got the shot. The frame is made from those tiny little bones in the ear, impressed into that paisley pattern, and then gold leaf with gesso, then gold leaf, and then imprinted those shapes again into the gold leaf. It's called I Touch Your Listening. And then, believe it or not, they let us do ecstatic dancing in the cemetery, which was really beautiful at night. It was very magical. So the whole audience that came to see the show joined us in dance. So this is the last piece I have for you. And it's 5, so we got to go fast. So I've been working on this piece for 2 years. And I made this labyrinth in a field in Kansas, in 3 fields in Kansas. And it is shaped in the shape of the anatomy of the human ear. It takes an hour to walk in and an hour to walk out, and is only made through walking. There's no other intercession besides tracking the shape. So for 2 years, I programmed and programmed and programmed until we walked it into the field. And the ecologists tell us that the path will remain for 100 years. And I worked with the field station at KU, which is a research space for ecologists, and I said to them, I'm happy to do this piece, but I want to leave the land in a better position than when I came. So we're slowly trying to restore the prairie. Here we are walking. And then at the front of the piece, I put this limestone boulder, and I made a finger labyrinth. So the same path that you walk, you did with you could trace with your fingers, and then remember it in your body and place yourself in the landscape within your own anatomy. So you never really see the path out there except, and then the first thing they told me is, if we're going to restore the prairie, we have to burn it. And I was like, what? And so we have now done 3 burns. This is right before the burn. This is during a burn. And this is after a burn. And this is a little ritual we made for the burning ceremony that had to do with invasive species. So one thing I should tell you is that the prairie plants go 20 feet under the ground, but the invasives are more superficial. So when you burn the field, the prairie plants always survive. And then we got the community to help us do the burn. And that's me feeling very macho with my red jumpsuit and my drip torch. And then after, we did a ritual where we rubbed ash on each other's ears and reminded us to be better listeners. And then what was incredible after the burn is that all these other paths arrived. The path of the voles, the little rodents, and the deer. And so I started to think about our path as a kind of strange game trail. And then Melinda Adams joined us. She has dedicated herself to the cultural burn, which is the indigenous form, and she's done the last 2 burns, very different than the prescribed burn, which was the first one. And then we did lots of tours. This is Sheena Parsons, the head of the field station, and she's giving a tour of the field through the perspective of the grasshopper. That was her area of study. So I had all these ecologists working with me who could give us so many different perspectives on the field. This is an ecology class, planting prairie plants. And this is the neighbors who make prairie tea. So we served prairie tea, and hopefully I'll be able to serve tea from the actual fields where my piece is soon. And this is an event that happened where this indigenous woman sang to the field itself, which was very beautiful, because as she walked the labyrinth, you could hear her voice sort of almost articulating the shape of the labyrinth. And this is a Kansas poet who, as you walk through the field, you're given a line of poetry to walk with, and a little instruction like reading it to a tree or to your loved one when you get home. And then we got someone from KU, from the music department, to drum in the middle of the cochlea. And those are just a few beings that I need to thank, because it really was a community project. I'm done.